Hello, everyone. Tasiko himbo naringashin ga Erandy. I just want to give a couple more time for folks to settle in. Um, I know that we are playing some music, but I got the notification that me sharing my screen would disrupt the music. So sorry about that. But I did want to go ahead and have my presentation up as I give one more minute for folks to settle in. Thank you so much for joining me in this virtual space. We'll get started soon. Thank you. Um, himbo naringashin ga Erandy. First, I want to start with acknowledging in which the land that I am connected to you all in this virtual space, which is Muckleshoot land. I also want to acknowledge the land in which I received my education from, UW Tacoma, which is on Puyallup land. I also want to acknowledge the land in which I have been able to build deep community roots with other Indigenous people, which is Nisqually land, um, and many of which are descendants from the Duwamish. Um, and it's so important to place that into context, especially as I'm going to talk about my identity as existing as a Purepecha um, woman in the diaspora, Purepecha youth, the Purepecha community organizer, and how my story is also connected to the parallel histories of the Indigenous people in which we all reside in. Um, I I want to start off with I was very much reflecting on what does it mean to give an inspirational type of session or speech. Um, and then I remembered, I'm like, how about I start with the theme in place? And then just do what I always do. I'm like, reflect, speak, write notes down, doodle. I'm like everything that I do in preparation for my podcasting, which maybe some of you all are familiar with. And if not, no worries, because you all will become very familiar with that work within this presentation. Um, I I went ahead and I started to think about growing roots and reaching new heights and what that really meant. And so therefore this entire presentation is incorporating my personal narrative and reflection by myself when it comes to reflecting this in a more I don't want to say individual because as you all will see, it's a very much a community reflection, but more specific to my my experience and everything that I have gone through. Um, go ahead and press next. I want to start off with this quote that I felt really, really inspired me to dig deeper into my personal reflection. I'm not self-made, I'm community-made, I'm family-made, I'm land-made, I'm ancestor-made. I'm made up of everything and everyone that made me exist outside just myself. When I thought about what are my roots, it made me think about the ways that we're all interconnected in one way or another, um, as well as that I am only as amazing as the people around me. Um, and my story doesn't just belong to just me, but it belongs to the communities in which I'm a part of. Um, it also made me think about how I see also the connections within my own themes that I'm created, like this theme of conversations that I've been carrying out this season with my podcast has been rooted reflections. And the whole idea was the fact that I needed to remind myself, what are my roots? What is grounding me? Especially as I reflect into this journey of young adulthood. And then I saw that, I'm like, well, that's just very much, I think, what the theme of this conversation is. It's about, finding roots, reaching new heights, because if we don't know where we come from and what is grounding us, we're not able to grow. I think growth is very much stunted when we see things from a very narrow perspective. Um, and it made me think of like, okay, like let's go ahead and start, Erandy. Let's think. I'm like, what does it mean to be you? I'm like, well, you're a Purepecha woman, but you also have the context of being raised in the diaspora. So away from my ancestral lands. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a relative, I'm a friend, um, I'm a student. And the people in which I feel like are a part of the story are the folks from Ireta Purepecha, from Auburn Youth United, and from Where Roses Grow, which really just centers around the people from my hometown, Auburn, which is Muckleshoot land. And I think it made me see so much of myself within that conversation. I'm constantly thinking about this, and it made me think of this specific journal entry in which I had to do for my class that I'm currently taking, which is called um it's a super long name. I think it's called Child Development in the Context of Race, Class, and Gender. And the first journal entry had to be about like, how do I reflect about these themes, about like my child development, and then thinking about the themes of race, class, and gender. And so I wrote this as my first entry. It's My name is Erandy Flores. I am a Purepecha woman who grew up in the diaspora, specifically a pocket community here in South King County. I grew up in a loving and resilient household, one with mixed immigration status and a low socioeconomic standing. I am the daughter of a landscaper who is passionate about community service and a tamalera who is a beloved community cook. I am part of the first generation to graduate from a high school and attend a four-year university. Being that I'm an Indigenous woman from a low-income household, I knew the issues of race, class, and gender greatly impacted me as a child. I did not have a choice but to be aware of the ways the communities I'm a part of face discrimination and institutional marginalization. In the same way, I am also aware of my privileges and given the chance to receive an education where I have the opportunity to critically analyze and learn about these issues. I have always simultaneously existed in survival mode and carry a sense of guilt for having more opportunities than those around me. In my adulthood, I've had to navigate how to dismantle these false narratives that were fed to me as a child. I have to come full circle and release myself of the shame that does not belong to me, but to the institutions that perpetuate racism, classism, and sexism. I'm taking this class to have a space to do this and taken learning that better helps me understand these issues in the context of child development. In particular, I plan to work in education as I believe this class will help me better understand my future students that will come from different backgrounds. Um, and I think that was very much needed to express how I'm constantly thinking as an ethnic gender and labor studies major. I'm emphasizing on ethnic studies and minoring in teaching, learning, and justice. So I very much see myself as someone that sees my role in community is working with youth, working with young people, working with families. And I need to continue to explore that in all the avenues that I am a part of. And when I thought about that, and I was like reflecting with my roommate last night, shout out to Sadie. I was telling her, I think the reason why I was also hyper aware of my context in which I grew up in is because was raised in this very fragile imagination of what my life was. You know, I I grew up what is, a lot of people would consider middle class up until a certain point. Then when my family would lose their house in 2008 after the market crash, um, I was back into the neighborhood in which I had originally came from. And I realized when you're stuck in this notion of like everything is fine, everything is just perfect the way it is, you forget all the subtle things that continuously dehumanize us, right? And I was telling her, I'm like, what I feel like dehumanizing feels like it's erasing our connection to our history. It's erasing our connection to our culture. It's erasing our connection to each other, and it's erasing our connection to the earth. And I'm like, because I, as I think I will repeatedly say, context matters. Um, and we cannot pretend that we can just move forward and not reflect on the past, present, and future simultaneously all together. Um, and I was telling her, I think also when that foundation broke, that was so fragile, I had this awakening. I'm like, when it broke and I felt like I was falling, from the cracks of, no longer being seen as like this token to the educational system in which that I grew up in. I'm like, it wasn't the institution that caught me. I'm like, it was my family, it was my friends, it was my community who reached out a hand and did not allow me to fail or to fall or to be crushed by this immense amount of weight. And as I continue to be an adult who wants to be as thoughtful as possible, I had to think about, okay, what is my connection to history? I was like, especially as someone who has this like displacement experience or this immigrant experience, I'm like, I have to find my connection to history in terms to education, to working with youth, because that's the realm that I want to go down. And it made me reflect, I could go back to 500 years and talk about my people's history of colonization, but I think a lot of people tend to push on narratives as in like it was so long ago, why are you holding on to this? And it made me reflect. I'm like, no, like there's stories that are also, I'm like, okay, then try to rebuttal me with this. um, and this is really my personal connection to what is this concept that I've come to learn is as Indigenous erasure and introduction to anti-Indigenous rhetoric, and as reflecting that my grandfather and other elders of my community were part of the generation that were sent to boarding schools. And interestingly enough, I actually found this video. It was sent to me by my dad as I was, I'm always questioning. And a lot of the times my dad helps guide me into finding the answers. I'm going to show a snippet of this video, just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to skip to the end. Um, and then I'm going to add an additional reflection to this. Because like I said, connection to history matters. But yes, I'll go ahead and play the video, hoping it all works good. All right, so I just got a few messages that we can't hear the video from what it sounds like. Um, Let me go ahead and try something. Let me go ahead and try to click directly onto the link. Let's see how this works. Nope, it's not. You'll have to reshare with sound. Okay, thank you. Sorry, y'all. I'm still trying to figure this all out. Let me go ahead and stop sharing and reshare with sound.
Mexico is a progressive country. Although our country borders Mexico for some 1,500 miles, few persons are conscious of our neighbor's problems and progress. Mexico wants a united country. But a large proportion of its population, unable to read or write, speaks one of more than 50 entirely distinct Indian languages, and thus it is difficult for these people to have a voice in the national government, where the official language is Spanish. Mexico wants unity, wants a government of and by its people. Mexico is progressive. Linguistic scholars from the Department of Indian Affairs are sent to remote areas on educational missions. The purpose of sending out these scholars is to show the inhabitants of small Indian communities that their own language can be written, that they can learn to read and write. Within the short period of its operation, each mission must train a native successor to carry on its work. Senor Nacho del Castillo has learned that his mission will be in the Tarascan area, about 300 miles from Mexico City. Running along a valley in the mountainous state of Michoacan, a recent highway links the town of Paracho with the outside world. Paracho is one of about 30 communities which have been selected by the Department of Indian Affairs as places to establish boarding schools, or internados, which soon become the cultural and economic centers of their district. They packed their little burro and went on their way to another village to spend another 6-month period developing interest, building literates, drawing the natives into the national picture of their country. Democracy is in the making. Mexico is progressing. A new generation is growing into the heart of the nation. Mexico is building a democracy.
Thank you. The reason why I introduced this video, and you all can watch it. It's like a 20, I think, minute-ish video, just describing a bit about the rationality behind the indigenous boarding school in Paracho. And then the community that's mentioned, Arantepacua, is just like right next to the village where my family is from, Quinceo, Michoacan. So I'm very much aware that they say as they move on to the next community, they're probably referring to us or one of our neighboring towns. And I introduced this because even with the title itself, as I claim I'm Purepecha, many of you all will probably be maybe more familiar in historical context of my community by the name Tarasco or Taraskin, which is an imposed name. When I have conversations with my elders, it's always very obvious. They're like, well, when we refer to each other in our language, it's Purepecha. When, people from the outside, they refer to us as Tarasco. And from what I found out is like repeated time after time, like it's not only our community that goes through this renaming situation of like there's a name we call ourselves and then there's a name that was imposed. And what does it mean to combat erasure is to say like, no, I'm Purepecha, I'm not Tarasco. But I also understand that many of my elders still see it from a very much of a lens of like, oh, Tarasco is what we call each other in Spanish, right? And I'm like, well, under that guise, like I'm not someone to, want to correct my elders, but I am going to always correct institutions. I'm always going to correct people that are outsiders that should know better, especially as many anthropologists want to label Tarascos as the present us and the Purépechas as the past us, the pre-Hispanics. And it always bothered me, this rhetoric, because I'm like, why are you trying to separate me from my ancestry? It's almost like they talk about the Purepecha, like we were engineers, we were mathematicians, we were all these great things. And then contemporary us, we're not. I'm like, there's a reason why we have to connect these two eras, the contemporary us and the ancestral us, because it provides a timeline of how we've gotten here. I'm like, so to try to disconnect us from this is just inherently wrong. I also want to combat like this whole narrative because this idea of progressiveness was very much fed into my grandfather, where the first time that I would ever hear anti-Indigenous rhetoric was my father recalling the narratives of my grandfather about progressive is learning Spanish. Progressive is, assimilating to this culture in which we are now in. Progressive is forgetting who you are so that we don't stick out, so we don't face harassment when we move into the larger cities in what is now known as Michoacan, Mexico. And that really, really stuck to me as a young adult because it made me think about like what problem, like they're pointing out there is a problem going on in our neighboring nation. I'm like, oh, the problem is that the way we exist bothers you, that the way that we're still alive bothers you. And it made me think of the same rhetoric that I heard in my Native Americans films class of kill the Indian, save the man. Kill anything that has to do in association with history and culture and save the man to bring into this progressive world. And it made me reflect on my experience as I thought about a counselor that had once said, I think our problem with us is that we just still want to hold on to our culture so badly. But we're in the United States. We have to forget that we are American now. We have to move forward. And the fact that I'm able to see these parallels was just so mind-blowing for me. I'm like, no, just because you're an authority figure to me, just because you're an adult, does it not mean that I connect with your rationality behind what it means to be a success story in the United States. So I did want to share this because as I'm also preparing myself, I have to remind myself, how did the institution of education as we now know it was first introduced to my community? Like, it was introduced in a way that was very violent. It was introduced in a way that was very much said that we needed to forget who we are and only hold an essence of a cultural us for the value of tourism, because that makes us unique. And I move along with this other part, which, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm pressing the right button, is this connection to culture. Like I mentioned, like there, when I say South King County, because many of you probably have known me in different spaces. I did grow up in specifically Auburn, Washington. Um, I say South King County because I grew up in a pocket community that very much entailed every weekend going to South Park, to Burien. Like, this is me and my cousins dancing in the South Park Community Festival, I think it was. And I also grew up in this context of the adults around me, because we were so far away from our home territory, had this deep yearning for us to like know who we are, eat the food, dress in our traditional regalia, go to dance practice. And it's just, I think this experience of diaspora needs to be more talked about, because a lot of the times people think like, oh, well, like, yeah, there's like um there's this migration from Mexican Americans, or this existence of like of Latinidad, when even when we start to dissect these things, like that there is cultures embedded that are constantly erased under those titles. And so I always want to uplift the fact that there is community here, that I have, either one I'm a part of, or two that I have been in community with in one way or another, that exist in this space as Indigenous people, while simultaneously being erased under this idea of what it means to be from Latin America, what it means to be, Mexican. Um, and I also just want to highlight that it's about connection to each other. The one of the biggest things that I've been able to learn um, was making sure that community has each other above everything. Um, and actually, shout out to Robin, who I also saw is here. This is part of a trailer. I don't know if I have enough time to show you all, but I really, really suggest you all to watch it. It's called La Resiliencia de los Pueblos Originarios during COVID-19. It was a collaboration that we did with Communities of Opportunity, where we got to talk about the resiliency of Indigenous communities that exist here in King County. It was a beautiful experience to interview adult figures, to interview young people, young adults, to talk about how did we really, continue these virtues that were taught to us, which is haraperakwa, which is the idea of mutual aid, the idea that community sustains itself in this reciprocal cycle. And it's also manasperakwa, the idea of how am I being useful to community? Am I being a service to community? And how in those moments where we knew community needed us, these ideas were like almost like, I want to say, ignited, like as if they were there, but it was like adding fuel, because we knew we cared so deeply, and we knew that in the face of everything, like whether or not these institutions want to hear us and what it means to be equitable, to make sure that you're servicing Indigenous communities in a right way by language access, technology access, so many different ways. How do we make sure that we got us? And it came out so many beautiful projects that happen within communities of opportunity, but also outside through food pantries and gift cards that we were able to do. At being able to connect families with resources, helping them and assisting and filling out digital applications for assistance. Um, it was beautiful to see that come out of us, because at the end of the day, it just shows this repeated pattern that it is our resiliency that will continue to have us surviving. And I want to say this was probably one of the best outcomes, as much as I am so grateful for so many of the opportunities that have always come my way. Um, Seeing the reaction from the Nusavi community and the Quechua community, and for them to you know give gratitude to me and to the people part of this project was probably one of the most impactful parts of my life. Because I think it's one thing when it's like an institution that like rewards you. It's another thing when community tells you thank you in a traditional way. And I was like, I was so surprised to be gifted a chicken. Like that was probably one of like the most like highlights of not even my year of my life, to be gifted a live chicken. Sadly I could not keep it. I gave it to a farmer that had space for it. Um, but it was very beautiful to just like recall also the ways that our communities are parallel to one another, but also the diversity that exists within each other. And then the connection to the earth. I actually started doodling as I was brainstorming for this presentation, a tree. And it made me think of this conversation that I once had with my family about how that there is like a whole different communication that happens between trees and plants and fungi, and how they're all interconnected by these roots. And we have often thought about it, and like there's a video that you all can also see, the secret language of trees. um this idea of like, well, it's the obviously the ones at the top are like, they're there because they're the survival, it's the survival of this of the fittest type of thinking. And no, like the more we look at microscopically of the way these things are connected, it's it's a cycle. Again, it's repeatedly shown that all these trees cannot exist without this its own community around it. And it's the fungi that connect to the trees, that connect to the other roots of different trees, and how they continue to sprout new ones, and about how the the elder trees, which is the ones at the top, are able to continue cycle by providing seedlings, by providing the different type of nutrients that they are able to get from the level that they are, and vice versa from the level that the tiny plants and trees are from. Um, it's just been very, very cool to think about it in that way, because as I thought about, I'm like, well, disconnecting us from the earth allows us to not see the way nature parallels the ways that we also coexist, and what it means to work in a collective. Um, and it made me think of the theme again. It made me think of what I have also been reflecting on, and the ways in which I also want to move in this way. Oh no. Um, Youth United. I think as I continue with this theme of what it means to, be a youth also from specifically Auburn. Um, I went I went from like the Head Start program since the age of 3, graduated at the age of 18. An interesting random fact, because I'm a September baby, like I was old enough to enter the Head Start program, but too young enough to enter the kindergarten program. So I did 3 years of preschool. Um, I think that very much was an introductionary way of like showing me like, okay, so this is what it's like to be in a space that's like primarily English, connecting with other like littles like me, but also very, very interesting way to be introduced into school. um and I want to talk about this experience of what it means to grow up in Auburn. um I When I think about Youth United, it was an organization that started off in around 2016, 2017, that advocated for immigrant rights and social justice, both in like locally in our town, but also in the Auburn School District. I really know as a co-founder, it came from this placement of when I was first introduced to what it meant to be an advocate as a child. My family for some time lived in Pacific, which is just like, it's so tiny. It's like almost just a part of Auburn, but it is a separate town. But everyone in that little town does attend Auburn School District schools. Um, the police were racial profiling heavily, and it caused a lot of community to come together and say like, hey, not only what you're doing is like inherently racist, because how can you look at somebody and assume their documentation status, but also what does this say about creating a welcoming space? And especially as we think about, is this against the law? And it was. It was against the law. And local orgs got involved in order for to help us as a community combat this. But it was also my introduction to like what community organizing looks like. I think where I was more conscious as a little 5-year-old, but also a very challenging one. Because of this, of course, the police became very combative, not only to my community, but specifically my family, as they saw us as part of the people that were publicly, shaming them, publicly calling them out on this racist tactic. And it really showed me at that moment, I'm like, I exist in this parallel of, being born and raised in the United States, but constantly being told that I don't belong here. Um, and what came out of that was this inertia to say, I need to continue to search for community. I need to continue to speak out. And what would first initiate Youth United was these students' walkouts that me and my sister planned amongst other students. We called out for youth in our community to come out to stick up for what they believe in, and then in that, again, always being challenged. There was a school that was denying its students' right to protest by having teachers block doors, which not only is a safety hazard, but again, like goes against our rights. And so, we called up the ACLU about what had happened. They gave us a lot of advice. Ultimately, it led for us to push for the district to, release a statement to clarify students' right to protest. It led to taking place of birth off of student directories. It led to the implementations of ethnic studies in all high schools. So we really much, when the challenge came, not only did we rebuttal what they did was wrong, but we're coming back with more. We want more than just this. We want real accountability. And it just came out that we continued to meet, continued to talk, because I think even above all these like amazing things that we were able to be a part of together, a huge part of it was the fact that it was youth that felt, I think, stigmatized and targeted, providing each other that support. And what it became now is that, as you all see, this was probably at the corner where there is we're picking up groceries was our last thing that we really did together, which was like do a food drive for a local food pantry, Algona Pacific Food Pantry, restock them as they were facing a time that they weren't getting a lot of resources due to COVID-19 and the disruption of a lot of the school food drives that they get, because schools were, all virtual. So we decided to substitute that by doing a community food drive. And when I reflect now on what it's now, a lot of the youth I'm still connected to, like we are family, we are friends, and they still reach out to me, provide updates. It's a group of people that I know who to call when situations are happening in our hometown, when somebody is facing discrimination, when somebody's rights are being violated, when other youth are calling for action. How do we also provide solidarity? And so I know exactly who I'm going to contact. Even as our journeys have moved us maybe even out of this town, even as our journeys continue maybe even further than that, than from the state, like I know exactly who to call when we need to vent, when we need to talk. And then Ireta Purepecha. This has been probably, I think my participation has been a lot in the making, because I grew up within what was originally Ayoranza Purepecha, Orgullo Purepecha, and now Ireta Purepecha, as just a youth participating in cultural dances, as a youth going to cultural events because my parents went to. But like I said, the pandemic, I think, really brought me more deeply into questioning my place within community. I think it also was a bit before then, like as I reflect, like I think my first like leadership type role in the or in the collective was practicing the cultural dances, but as an instructor instead of just a young person trying to learn. And when I reflect on what it means to be this collective, it's the idea that we have to build like a strong solidarity for the future. It makes me think about reconnecting or making time to reconnect with the earth and ceremony, because that is so needed in times where I feel constantly defeated, to remind myself like, no, they haven't won yet. Like they haven't won yet, because look at this community that you have around you that constantly reminds you what it means to be hopeful, what it means to be reciprocal. And I specifically added this purepecha doll here in the corner, as I also want to bring in an anecdote from also being connected to Colectiva Erashamani and Retepeni. Those are collectives that we also got in contact during the pandemic and did virtual workshops with, and a virtual sale for Purepecha artist work. But they also work under this idea of self-sustaining through their artwork, and then as well as being solidarity with women that are escaping violence within their home by providing them shelter and connection to resources. Um, and this was a gift for when I finally got to meet them in person a year ago. And I think meeting them was definitely another really big moment in my life as I think about the gender violence that disproportionately impacts Indigenous women. It felt I felt this emotion of almost like falling to my knees, of like, I knew this was happening and I was waiting for someone to say it because my voice was too shaky to say it out loud. And to know that they're doing amazing work and that I am in parallel with them in solidarity. They were also the ones that introduced me to the word uchar sipikwa. There's a common phrase in Purepecha contemporary groups. This is uchar winapikwa, which means like, this is for our strength. They introduced me to this is for our lives. And that very much centered me in this idea of like, not only am I doing it to strengthen my community, I'm doing it because lives are on the line. And I need to be vocal, I need to be strong. And I'm reminded that even when I felt alone, I was never truly alone, because there was people that were also simultaneously doing this important work back home. And I do want to be cautious with time, as I also have my stopwatch here. That's what I'm glancing at. Um, the the introduction to Where Roses Grow was something that was just so organic, spontaneous. I got a link to participate in, like it was an application. It was an application to create an anti-racism communications project for the roadmap project. And they were specifically calling for South King County youth. I'm like, okay, perfect. It was so bizarre to me to hear them name Federal Way, Kent, Auburn. I was just like, oh wow, like I have never heard organizations like specifically talk about like this region. Later on, based on statistics, it would all make sense why there is this call for communities like mine to, be put in the forefront of our stories. But season one was very much centered around youth activism in Auburn. I got to interview my sister, who I would call my collaborator in almost everything, even this project as my first one by myself outside of, the collectives that I'm part of. Like, they're still a part of it in one way or another. I'm like, my sister was still my person, that my go-to to like ask for advice and everything about this, as well as being able to interview the Black Youth Leadership Coalition founders, Joy and Carrie, and talk about what it meant to be youth organizers within the Auburn School District, as well as talk with BL and Sarlene about uplifting Pacific Islander youth, specifically formerly incarcerated youth, to be able to talk to Youth United and reflect what was it like to be in part of this collective. And as well, an episode that I feel like is especially important is Perspectives of an Indigenous Youth by Shane Moses, who is Muckleshoot and Warm Springs. And so I really encourage you all to listen to these different stories. And as I reflect again, like these things are just so interconnected. Though the title, which if you have listened to my podcast already or has I've shared with you already, came from this poem by Tupac Shakur, "The Rose That Grew from Concrete." Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. And that poem, it made me think about I'm really not living a unique experience, and the fact that I know so many youth feel the exact same way that I feel. And it made me think about how I was often tokenized in so many spaces throughout my entire educational experience, but as well as like youth advocacy spaces, that I had to dignify how upset and how much rage I had in me. And I'm like, but I have to do it in a way that is productive. And I told myself, I'm like, not only do I want to uplift the roses that flourish despite it all for my community, I also want to be someone that breaks the concrete, that breaks these things that are holding other people back from flourishing, because I want everyone to flourish. And that's where the idea of season 2, where I currently have one episode out and there will be another one real soon as I'm able to edit. Because with transparency, it has been really hard to be inspired by myself. I think it's very easy to be in a space to like try to motivate others, but to motivate myself has always been somewhat of a challenge, especially as I reflect on the violence that's happening globally and locally. It weighs very, very heavy on my heart. And I know that this project is important because it's an archive. It's one combining contemporary forms of media, but also recalling ancestral forms of storytelling. And part 2 is very much going to be centered around the adult figures that I feel like help shape who I am, and who also I'm very much like inspired by, and asking for advice that I feel like is very much needed. So if you all would like to continue these rooted reflections with me and this thought processes that happen in my head, you can find it in all major streaming platforms. And, to finish off, I think one of the biggest things has been the ways that I am connected here in South King County, in Auburn, in Muckleshoot Land, in Washington, or what has now become known as Washington, but how I'm also connected to places back home, and how I know that every time that I am in a space where I am able to talk about my experience, my community, where I'm given these amazing honors and these chances to just like self-express, I'm always going to bring my community with me. I'm never going to gatekeep. I think that's been one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, that the abundance that I have has to be spreaded amongst community. And every time that I am honored in this position, I'm going to be very, very vocal about my Purepecha existence to continue to combat Indigenous erasure. Because I was talking to my friend the other day and I was telling her, one of the biggest things that I've learned is I make peace with my elders. Like, I'm trying to make peace with my elders and the ways that they were harmed and, reciprocated that harm. Because, this idea that hurt people hurt people. But I'm trying to take a step back and say, how do I break that cycle? How do I not participate in that? And how do I do it in a way that is healing, in a way that uplifts all the knowledge that I have, the knowledge that came before me, and the knowledge that I'm going to pass on? So, you know, I just want to thank you all so much for taking some time to sit down and get to know a bit about me. Yeah, thank you.
Erandy,
Yes.
this is Carrie Wade. I just popped on at the end, and you have blessed me today. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know I speak for others here as well. That was exactly what we needed, exactly what we really needed to hear. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Bye.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining. And thank you for the invitation.